Me? Thanks for waiting. Okay, good. Hi, Krish.
Sure. Hi.
Yeah, it is raining here, so
Okay.
I could not go to office, so I just joined. Not joined from home only.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so we'll just wait for other to join, then we'll start. So how are you doing? It's what is time now?
It's 8:30, 8:27 p.m.
Okay, good, good.
Can we try something? I want to check if the Menti works. Can I just, if you can go to...
What is that? Yeah, you can just start sharing your screen. Well, we'll see whether you can do that.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
One minute. Meantime, I also need to show some slides here.
Yeah, can you just try something? Can you go to menti.com
What for?
and enter this code, or you can use your phone and scan this QR code. Either way. And
okay. Yeah, can you, anyone of you can just do that one and just see that responded to Surup or Chaitra?
It is showing like how familiar are you with photochemical modeling? Like
correct.
Yes.
Correct. So what you have to do is just choose one response. So in your case, you can say not first time. You can say that.
Okay. Sir.
Actually, can you? Yeah. Okay. I guess if it's one person, it's okay. There you go. All right. Perfect. It's working. Thank you. Thank you for testing.
Okay. Sir.
In case I have any internet issues, just wait and I'll connect again. Okay, during the presentation.
देख लेता हूँ अभी लगा।
Hey, Shriram, it's raining. I also need to. Okay. Uh-huh. Today. No. Today we didn't ask any meeting today. 3 o'clock. No. There's nothing meeting scheduled for 3 o'clock today. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, just check with Shamit if he's called anything. I think there is no. We didn't. No, we're not calling. Sure. So I'll share the screen. Krish, I'll just use some 5 minutes to introduce you and also,
Sure.
talk. And once I finished, and maybe we have Chaitra or Lakshmi. Lakshmi, who will going to introduce Krish?
Sir, I can introduce.
Okay, sure. Lakshmi will going to introduce, and after that you can start, Krish.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just share the screen so that. Gupta ji, good morning. Some issue is happening with my APT creation. Can one of you share from your computer?
Yes, sir, we will share this.
Okay, good. Okay, we got, and maybe we'll start. Krish, is it? Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, so we'll start. So very good morning to all of you, and good evening to those who are joining. With the time difference. Welcome to Air Quality Management lecture series, and indeed it is a great pleasure to announce that this is the 50th lecture. So the 50th month lecture. Thanks to all kind support from various speakers and participants to making this Air Quality Management lecture series a successful, ongoing event. Go to the next. Just to give you some brief about air quality management lecture series, this lecture series is first of its kind, and maybe in the world. And I have not seen in any lecture series which freely, given opportunity for the students and practitioners to attend, and exchange their ideas. We started this lecture series in October 2020, and its basic idea was to provide a forum for young researchers and scientists, engineers, educators, and practitioners to share the latest advancement in theory and practices of air quality management, subject. This lecture includes recent developments, some innovations, and use of recent technologies in the area of air quality management, and also provides an opportunities. Many times the speakers who have given their talk also get benefited with attracting some young researchers for their research group. Go to the next. Okay, just to give you, we started this lecture with first lecture with B. Sengupta, and you can see that there is a mix of speakers contributed from across the globe, starting from US to Australia. So these are all continue with that. As you see that there are 50th lectures, so there are 50th speakers. So last lecture was given by Dr. Prakash Doreswamy. He was a director of air quality at WRI India. And this lecture is given by Krish. I will introduce to later. Just to give some more activities, we started with air quality management lecture series. So we also started an air quality management association in July 2022. Again, the main objective of this association is to enhance understanding the science behind air quality and promoting knowledge of clean air and understanding the best working practices to the community. AQML was formed to address issues of air quality, indoor air quality, health risk, technological interventions, and policy formulations. So, I mean, this has been indeed started very recently. So we are, exploring various avenues to strengthen its activities. And we are most welcome to anybody interested to become a member for Air Quality Management Association. Use this QR scan to get more details about the registration. Next. Next, to give you some idea about this Air Quality Management lecture series, this was initiated as a part of our Clean Environment for Planetary Health in Asia. This was an UK-funded project in 2019. So we were very successful in collaborating with several organizations and come out with an idea of what works better for managing the environment. So with a key theme of engaging research, identify what works, strengthening the international cooperation, capacity and capability building, and also we could also successful in this research. We also got some new funding as a network while working within this network. Next. And of course, we also initiated a newsletter as a part of CEPHA network. That is what we call it Prakruti. It's a quarterly newsletter which was published, inviting articles from various community members. Just to give you, and many of you aware that you are participating in this Indian International Conference on Air Quality Management, very successful conference. This is again the 9th year we are organizing conference. This will be at IIT Madras this time, and the dates are 18th to 20th December 2024. And more details, you can visit our website. And this conference provides more opportunity to understand measurement, modeling, health risk, and public policy. Next. So I welcome Krish Vijayaraghavan. I know him quite long, and he was one of the supporter for our various air quality management activities. So now I'll request Lakshmi to introduce Krish Vijayaraghavan. He's a principal at Ramboll and leader at the US Environmental Impact Assessment Practices.
Krish Vijayaraghavan is a principal at Ramboll and a leader of the US Environmental Impact Assessment Practice. He has over 20 years experience in air quality modeling and has published over 40 research papers and co-authored 2 technical books. Today's talk is titled Fundamentals of Photochemical Modeling with CAMx. This lecture will include an overview of Eulerian photochemical models and how they differ from Lagrangian dispersion models, the advantages of Eulerian photochemical models, features of the CAMx photochemical model such as resolution, advection, diffusion, deposition, chemistry, and plume in-grid treatment, model inputs such as emission metrology and other data, and outputs such as air concentrations and wet or dry deposition, and advanced probing tools such as source apportionment technology and reactive tracer modeling. We welcome you, sir, to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, can you tell me what you're seeing? Are you seeing the cover slide?
Yes, we are seeing the cover slide. Maybe Krish, you can also hide that, stop sharing.
Okay. All right. Good morning, all. Those of you in India, gives me great pleasure to give this talk. This is going to be hopefully useful to you. I first want to acknowledge my colleagues at Ramboll, Chris Emery, Marco Rodriguez, Greg Yarwood, Ralph Morrison, Gary Wilson, who have all played a big role in the CAMx model. In today's lecture, I will follow the following sequence. First, I'll present a brief overview of our company. Then I want to conduct a survey of the audience. So be prepared either with your cell phone or if you're near a computer. I'm going to ask you to participate in a brief survey, in a live survey. And then I will present an overview of atmospheric dispersion models. We will discuss the advantages and some of the disadvantages of Eulerian photochemical models. We will discuss the features of CAMx, and CAMx is the photochemical model we are using as an example today. CAMx stands for Comprehensive Air Quality Model with extensions, so we call it CAMx. We will discuss the different features of CAMx and then also talk about the pollutants that are modeled, both gas pollutants and particulates. I will explain the inputs and outputs of the model. We'll dive into the technical formulation of the photochemical model. And then we will talk about probing tools. Probing tools are the tools available in the model to do various things like source apportionment, like if you want to find out which source is contributing to the air quality problem in a large region. And also, if you want to look at reactive tracer species that are mostly tracers, maybe they have a little bit of chemistry. Finally, for those of you who are not familiar with Linux, I also want to present a little bit about the fundamentals of Linux for photochemical modeling. The reason is that it is very interesting to learn, and you would definitely need it if you want to do any modeling. So some of you may be doing some modeling on your PC. To learn Linux is very easy. So for those of you in that position, hopefully it's helpful. So first, a brief overview of our company. Ramboll is a worldwide engineering, environmental, and architectural consultancy. It's a consulting firm with the headquarters in Denmark. We have about 18,000 experts around the world in various disciplines such as environment, energy, water, buildings, highways, uh, even management consulting, etc. And you can see the circles where the different offices are around the world. And you can see we have many offices in India as well, including in Chennai. In India, a lot of the focus is on the engineering side. So constructing telecom tower design, providing support to offshore wind design in Europe, supporting our colleagues in Europe, also projects in India for a lot of sustainable finance projects. So a lot of interesting projects are being done in India as well. And I'll mention this at the end of the talk as well. But if anybody is in the environmental space and is interested in a job in environmental impact assessment, so not air quality in particular, but overall environmental impact assessment, which, as you know, is air, water, vegetation, wildlife, all of those things. If you're interested, let me know, and we can probably talk. Okay, moving on, I'd like to do an audience survey. So to find out how familiar you are with photochemical modeling. So I'm going to do a live share in about 1 minute. So before that, so the question you will see when you go to, you can do it two ways. If you're near a computer, you can go to menti.com and type in this code. If you have a smartphone on you, you can just scan this using your camera, and then that'll take you to a site. And then there you're going to answer this question. You pick one of these three choices. So photochemical modeling, you're not familiar at all, and this is the first time you're hearing about it. First time you're learning about it. The second option is you're familiar with the idea of photochemical modeling. You've generally heard people talk about it. You have maybe some idea about modeling, but you have not run it before. You have not run the model before. And then the third option is if you have run a photochemical model previously. Like this could be either CAMx or CMAC or WRF-Chem or WRF or even SkiChem, one of those models. Okay. So hopefully you've written down this code or you're scanning this on your phone. So let me now go to the okay, there we go. So this is a live experience. So far, about 12 people have responded, 13. Okay, so this blue is first time today. Pink is familiar with the idea, but have not run it before. And third is I've run a photochemical model previously. And if you haven't got the code, you can again scan this with QR code with your phone, or you can type in this code at menti.com 5647 3949. And once go to menti.com, type in that code 5647 3949, and then answer one of these three, pick one of these three options. Or if you have a smartphone on you, you can scan this QR code with your phone and choose the option that you like. So we are seeing a live thing here, and so far it's a good responses from everybody. So we have about 10 people are saying it's the first time they were doing it or learning about it today. And about 6 people familiar with the idea but have not run it before. So about 16 so far. So I'll let this run for another maybe 1 minute. So anybody else wants to try, you can either go to menti.com, type in the code 5647 3949, or scan this QR code phone. So if we go to our participants list, right? Remember, there's a lecture and it's not a presentation, so I really want the audience to be engaged. I see about 50, Shiva, Dr. Shiva, is this about 40, 50 people maybe attending? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, about 35 at least, and maybe more, some in the room as well. So all of you, many of you are students, so I would like everybody to, either you have a phone on you or you're near a computer. So certainly we want more people to respond. We have about 16 responses so far. Okay, so I'll come back to this after a while. But thank you for those responses. So what that tells us so far, roughly 2/3 is their first time today, and roughly 1/3 they're familiar with the idea, but they've not run it before. Okay, so that gives us a good idea of what the proportion is. And what is interesting is nobody in the thing has run. I've run a photochemical model previously, so hopefully you find this very useful. It is, some of it may be complicated, but that's okay. There are parts of it which are going to be easy, but the goal is to provide as much information as is possible, so that you can always try it out later. So first, I'm going to present an overview of atmospheric dispersion models. So if you're a modeler, if you've done any modeling, the one that most people are familiar with is called AERMOD, AERMOD. And before that, there used to be a model called ISC. And ISC then became AERMOD. AERMOD is the most common model. It is used all over the world. Actually, all of these models are used all over the world, but especially in India, I think AERMOD is used quite often, and then CalPUF. And then you have another model called SCEPHA or SCECAM. These are all come into the category of Lagrangian or Gaussian models. So the thing about dispersion models is that, first of all, what is an equality model? A model that helps us predict air concentrations based on some emissions. Here we are not talking about like chemical mass balance models or receptor models. There you have an observation and you are estimating emissions or who's contributing. Here we are talking about dispersion models. All of them solve a form of the continuity equation where pollutant concentrations change in time and space. So on the one hand, you have Lagrangian or Gaussian models where, like, imagine you can see this tall stack here, right? And you can see the plume coming out. So imagine this is like a magic carpet that's coming out of the top of the stack. Imagine this is a power plant. This is the plume. So imagine like Aladdin or something like that. You're sitting on a magic carpet. The magic carpet goes along with the plume or the air parcel. That is what a Lagrangian model does. The Gaussian model, or that refers to the concentration pattern of each puff. These models are usually simple compared to Eulerian models and less expensive. These are all like, I mean, French and German and Europeans who came up with this stuff. I'm sure the Indians also knew about this a long time back. It's just that their names are not as famous to the conventional science, but I'm sure there are Indian names who worked on a lot of this a long time back. So within each puff, you have Gaussian concentration patterns, but then there are a lot of limitations on the models. So here in very small font, you can see the equation for the Gaussian equation. C is the concentration, X, Y, Z, and T are the space and time dimension. Q is emissions. And then you have the sigma, which is the standard deviation. And then you have height, which is the effective height. So this is the height of a stack. So you can see HS is actual stack height. And so some of you who have done modeling may be familiar with this, okay, on the left side. On the right side, it's less common. Eulerian models are less common, but they're much more powerful. Here, the coordinate system is fixed in space. What do we mean by that? Imagine, I mean, right now you're either sitting in Chennai or somewhere else in India or somewhere else around the world. So imagine whichever city you're in or whichever country you're in, imagine there was a big mesh that was put on, like a gridded mesh that was put on a region. That is this mesh we are seeing in the figure here on the right side. And then in that mesh, you have many grid cells. We call each of these as a grid cells. The whole thing we call a grid. You have a horizontal grid and a vertical grid. In horizontal, you have X and Y, and then in vertical, you have different vertical layers. The vertical layers can go up to the tropopause or even more, so 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers. And then in the horizontal, the resolution can be very, very small. You have many such grid cells. In each grid cell, you will have the emissions of certain types of sources. So you can see in this figure, you can see here that might be a power plant out there. That this little can one of you tell me? Do you see my mouse moving? Can somebody tell me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So then this is the power plant. You can see it is there in this grid cell. Then here is some residential and commercial sector. It's in this grid cell. Then some resource extraction like oil and gas. It's in this grid cell. And then maybe some roadway transportation, right? So each of those is put in specific grid cells and you release the emissions. And then what you do is you follow the emissions as they go from one grid cell to another. How do they go from one grid cell to another? It could be by advection or diffusion. Advection simply means like the regular transport from one place to another. And diffusion is diffusion of small molecules amongst each other. And then along the way, you also have reactions and you have deposition. So the continuity equation is a change in concentration of a pollutant, which is del C over del T. So for those of you who are familiar with partial differential equations, this will be quite familiar. But even if you're not familiar, the concept, if, without getting into the mathematics, just the idea is quite simple. That is, the change in concentration over the time period depends on how much gets advected, how much gets diffused, and then how much chemistry happens, how much emissions come into the grid cell, and how much deposition happens. So that's the whole idea of an Eulerian photochemical model. Why is it called Eulerian? Because there's some scientist called Euler who came up with this idea of the coordinate system. And then within a particular grid cell, this is a close-up shot of just the advection and diffusion terms. And here, you can see that the reaction term is shown here. So dNO2 by dt is K times NO2 minus JO3. JO3, J stands for the photolysis of ozone. So this is any reaction that happens to NO2. So overall, Eulerian photochemical models are complex and more expensive, but you'll be surprised nowadays with AI, things are becoming, you can use the results of other models, and I feel that things are going to become cheaper as we go forward. They are grid models, so the results depend on grid resolution. Grid resolution means the spacing of the grid. You can have 100 meters, 200 meters, or 1 kilometer. We also have something called plume grid, which is like you can combine a grid model with the plumes. And then these are 3 examples of common Eulerian photochemical models. First one is CAMx. Next is CMAQ, which is called CMAC. And then WRF-Chem or WRF-Chem, which is also quite common. And then you have some global models like, say, Geoschem, for example. So you have several models. So these photochemical models have advantages and disadvantages. The advantages, you can put many different types of emissions. like anything in the world you can model completely. You can use very complex meteorological data sets. The chemistry can be non-linear. When something like AirMod has no chemistry at all or very simple chemistry, CalPAF has some simple chemistry. So whereas these models have very complex nonlinear chemistry, and you can remove pollutants in many ways, and you can apply it for a small region, for a place like Adyar. You can apply it to Chennai, you can apply it to Tamil Nadu, you can apply it to South India, you can apply it to India, you can apply it to Europe, so on. So the range is quite extraordinary. The limitation is it is data intensive. You need a lot of data, and then the grid resolution affects your accuracy and speed, and you need some advanced numerical treatments. You also need uh, computers, obviously more advanced, more memory in your computer. So CAMx is the comprehensive air quality model with extensions. If you're interested, it's freely available. You can go to camx.com and download it. It's as given here, it's a multi-scale photochemical modeling system for gas and particulate air pollution. We updated Ramboll. It's maintained by Ramboll. It is updated periodically. So the most current version is version 7.3, posted on June 2024. And then there also, if you go to the site, you'll also see all of our publications. So the process overview is shown here. Like, let's say you want to understand what is causing some high ozone over Chennai, which is unusual because in the past you haven't seen it. Now you're seeing more of it. So first thing you will do is you will design your study. What is the goal of your study? What are you trying to determine or estimate? And then, for example, you may know what you may have certain objectives already in mind. So those will all be used in the study design. Then you go about preparing your model inputs. And I'll be talking about all of this later. Then you will get the CAMx code itself, configure the control file. Then you would run the model. Then you would do what is called post-processing. That is processing the outputs to get the things we want. What are the things we usually want? We want air concentrations. Like in this case, how much ozone ppb is it predicting? So how do we know if the model is predicting it properly? We do something called model performance evaluation, or MPE, where you run the model for a known base case, and then you compare, like it'll be like you'll run it for year 2020 with certain emissions and metrology for that year. And then you have certain concentrations at output. You'll compare those to observations to see if the model predicted those outputs well. So using that model performance evaluation, then you are able to validate the model. And then you use it for a study such as this. So once you run it for a certain set of emissions, then you get air concentrations, deposition, even things like visibility. Visibility means, sometimes there is so much dust in the air, you cannot really see clearly, right? So that is what visibility impairment is about. It's also called haze, H-A-Z-E. The next thing is you can visualize the model outputs. I already talked about model performance evaluation. Those are the three things that happen. So first, we'll go into some of the features of CAMx. So here, as mentioned here, it's a regional tropospheric photochemical grid model. So it doesn't go into the stratosphere. Usually, if you want to go into the stratosphere, then you apply some global model like GeoSChem. You have different types of chemical mechanisms. I'll be talking about all of this later. Comprehensive particulates, that is aerosols are the particulates, and then mercury and toxics. Here on the right side, this is just a random example. This one is for ozone, some case study across the US. You can see you have max and min shown over the United States with the color scale. And then again on the left side, you can run CAMx from very small scale, spatial scale, to very big scale. So it can just be 1 kilometer or even less. Like I said before, you could run it over even like a small part of Chennai, or you could run it to several thousand kilometers. So you could run it to Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, all of Asia, Europe, etc. And then there is an option called plume and grid where you can also model individual point source plumes. The advantage of this is that, so then you get the benefit of both the Lagrangian model and the Eulerian model at one shot by using plume and grid. So shown here is like the picture of a stack with a plume coming out from it. So that also you can model in CAMx. And then you get the meteorological and emission inputs from other models. The grid nesting, what does grid nesting means? It means, when you're trying to model any region, like I mentioned, if you have a very fine or very small grid spacing, it is good. So like 1 kilometer or 500 meters. But imagine you're trying to model all of India or all of Europe. You cannot use a very fine grid spacing because then the computational needs will be too much. So then you use grid nesting, where the outer grid will be like a coarse resolution, like 36 kilometers, and then the inner grid can be a fine grid. We use different map projections. When you look at as all of us know, the Earth is like a sphere, not completely a sphere, but it's close to a sphere. And we are trying to show it on a flat screen like this, right? So this is the United States, but actually this is not a flat surface, right? It is curved. So how do you convert that curve to a flat surface? For that, you use map projections. These are different types, and all of these are available in CAMx, Lambert, Polar, Mercator, UTM. So of these, the most common are probably UTM and Lambert. Unless you're near the poles or in Northern Europe, etc., then you'll use Polar. Different advection, right deposition options, I'll talk about this later. And then also we have a re-emission model, which is, if, for example, ammonia, we have a bidirectional model. Ammonia can fall to the surface, but can also be emitted from vegetation. What are the different pollutants modeled in CAMx? So first, the criteria pollutants and precursors: ozone, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, PM2.5, PM10, CO, even lead. Then volatile organic compounds, ammonia, mercury, many other air toxics, and several other species. Then the model also outputs dry and wet deposition. So you could have, for nitrogen species, there are very large number of nitrogen species in the model: NO2, NO, nitric acid, nitrous acid, dinitrogen pentoxide, ammonia, particulate ammonium, organic nitrogen, like peroxyacetyl nitrate. The organic nitrogen itself, we have like 4 or 5 species, so many species like that. So if you wanted to know nitrogen deposition, you'll add up all of that to get it. Now, why do we care about nitrogen deposition? Suppose you have a power plant, a thermal power plant. Some of you may know it puts out a lot of NOx or nitrogen oxides as emissions. So that goes in the air, gets converted to nitric acid or other nitrogen species. Then when there's rain, it comes down as acid rain. So for example, nitrogen comes down in the rain. When that enters the water body, like any lake or river, that causes eutrophication. So it has nitrogen deposition, has negative effects on water bodies like rivers, lakes, sea, and even sulfur species causes acidification. So those two can also be calculated by the model. In terms of the particulate matter, pollutants, this is a list of everything that's in CAMx. So from top to bottom, first you have sulfate. Sulfate is, like if you have a car and it's putting out some sulfur dioxide, then that will form sulfate, especially in clouds. Then you have particulate nitrate, particulate ammonium. Ammonia comes a lot from, even nitrate comes a lot from fertilizer use. Then you have aerosol water content, sodium and chloride, which all of you may know, it comes from salt. So like sea salt, if you're near a sea, then you'll have sodium and chloride in the air as particulates. Elemental carbon, when trees burn, or even from the cars, from the tailpipe exhaust of cars, you get elemental carbon. Then you have primary particulate matter, fine crustal, coarse PM. And then you have these specific components of particulates. These are not modeled commonly, only if you're specifically interested, because this is all part of particulate matter, but they're very, very small concentrations, but they can be toxic in some cases. So all of these can be modeled as well. Moving on, CAMx has features called probing tools. Probing tool is, you run a model, you get concentrations, fine. But if you want to understand more, who is contributing how much? If I control emissions in this source, how much will my ozone reduce by? Things like that. Then you use these probing tools. The first one is called source apportionment technology. Here you're tracking like let's say you have ozone, like back to my former example of ozone in Chennai. You can, if you want to track it to certain emissions from a certain source group or from a certain region, you can do that. Or similarly for PM. Decoupled direct method or DDM is a method where you track sensitivity. So sensitivity is different from source apportionment. Okay. So first of all, if we look at the basics first, the simplest thing you can do is you run the model without anything special. The second thing you can do is you can run the model, but you can zero out your source of interest. That is called brute force zero out. Like you'll run it for India, but and then you can zero out all emissions from power plants, and then you can find out how much by subtracting the two, you can find out how much power plants contribute. That's called brute force. Now, in the probing tools, you can get even more information. So source apportionment tells you how much, and I have an example later, so I'll talk about it in detail there, how much different sources contribute. In the decoupled direct method is different. It is if you change the emissions just by a little bit, how much will the ozone change by? That's what that gives you. HDDM, H stands for high DDM, which is higher order mathematical correlations. Third one is called process analysis tools. This is if you are, suppose you're a modeler and you want to find out, is diffusion causing a problem, or is emission giving a lot of mass, or is it the deposition, things like that. You can analyze a model at a process stage. And then finally you have reactor tracers, which I'll be talking about later. In terms of input and output for CAMx, now this figure is very complicated, but the main thing to remember is, if you look at the top, what are the inputs to CAMx? You have emissions, you have metrology, some data on photolysis, some data on the land cover and the geography, and then some information on initial or boundary conditions. Okay, so first let's look at emissions. The emissions inventory, you'll develop anthropogenic. And anthropogenic means like a human cost inventory, and then also biogenic. So I'm just going to drink some water. 1 second. Okay, and then the emissions are processed through a model such as smoke or EPS3. And then you could have a biogenic model like Megan. You notice this blue arrow coming from WRF. So let's talk about metrology first. Metrology, you use a metrological model. The most common model is called WRF, Weather Research and Forecast Model. It is also used independently to predict things like hurricanes or monsoon and weather. It is actually used quite a lot in India too, separately, WRF. And that provides and gives you predictions of metrology. You see the blue arrow going from there to smoke and biogenic, because the metrology is also used in the emissions model to come up with finally and you can skip this part, this is just some interface programs. And finally, you come up with the emissions for CAMx. These will be like a specific emission file that tells you what is the emission of each pollutant, for every hour of the day for every grid cell. The emissions can be like a point source, which is like a stationary stack, or it can be an area source as well. Then we already talked about metrology. We process that metrology, and also this blue arrow shows each one of these arrows indicates a certain type of file that is provided to CAMx. And this, by the way, this concept is similar to all photochemical models. It's very similar. So even if you work with another photochemical modeling system, it will be similar. Then we have photolysis. So what is photolysis? By the way, why do we call these as photochemical models? Photo means light. So photolysis refers to the unique power that sunlight has in breaking apart certain molecules, like ozone. It can break the bond in ozone, or it can break the bond in NO2 and form NO and O. And that is what actually results in the formation of ozone in the atmosphere. So to come up with the photolytic, and why do we need that? Because certain reactions in the photochemical model obviously are dependent on the amount of sunlight and the photolysis rate, which in turn depends on where you are in the world, how much cloud cover is there, etc., what altitude you're at. So all of that information is used along with certain ozone data from satellite information to come up with some inputs for CAMx related to photolysis. The next thing is geography. What is the land cover? Do you have a lot of forests, vegetation? Is it farmland? Is it cities, etc.? That you process using GIS and then combine it, and then you, again, that forms another input. Finally, this IC-BC prep refers to first IC, which is initial condition, and BC, which is boundary condition. So boundary condition is when you go back to this figure, so you have this modeling domain, but the ozone in any one area is affected by long range transport also coming from far away, like Asia, etc. Like for example, in India will be affected by atmospheric transport coming from outside as well. That outside effect is called boundary condition. An initial condition refers to what is the concentration in the model to begin with in the domain. So for the boundary conditions, we use usually a global model like GeoSchem, Mozart, these model CAMchem, etc., to come up with the boundary conditions. Okay, once you run CAMx, then you have many post processors for formatting the files. Then for checking performance, there are some regulatory tools and also the probing tools. The format uses netcdf format, file format. So, all of you would be familiar with text format or Word, PowerPoint, etc. So netcdf is a special format that's used around the world. It is very powerful format in our field. Not just in our field, many environmental people, and not just environmental people, many others use it because it helps you. You can do a lot of data compression, and the model reads the file and outputs a file in that format. We also use some Fortran binary formats, but those are probably be deprecated soon, so those will be discontinued. But the main thing to remember is netcdf format, which, by the way, even if you're using any other model, it's a good idea for you to become familiar with netcdf format. Next, metrology. You get, for example, this is an example of precipitation at a given timestamp. You can see the red is the high values of precipitation. The units are inches. So here you can see 7 to 8 inches, and then here it's dry. This is during a specific time of the day. So the meteorological model gives you many things like land cover, snow cover, wind, temperature, pressure, humidity, clouds, rain, etc. And then there's a preprocessor tool that's available to convert those to CAMx inputs. Then you have emissions. Emissions, typically you have three types of emissions. First, you have gridded surface emissions. By surface emissions, we mean low-level emissions, like all the cars you see around you and the trucks. Those are called mobile emissions. And then you have area emissions. Area is like if you're applying a fertilizer to a field, then those are area emissions of ammonia. Then if you have biogenic emissions, it's like from vegetation. Some emissions are gridded 3D emissions. This would be from aircraft, wildfires, or even lightning is a big source of NOx. So whenever you have a thunderstorm and lightning, that is also releasing NOx, NO in the atmosphere. And finally, you have elevated point emissions. These are for specific stacks, large industrial stacks or sources with plume rise, where plume rise is calculated within the model. So I already talked about boundary conditions defining pollutant fluxes into the domain, and we already talked about photolysis. So I'll move on. So now with regards to output concentration, outputs, you first have concentrations and deposition. Concentrations could be sub-hourly or hourly or even bigger. Then the species, if it's gases, it's usually in ppm or ppb. Aerosols or particulate matter is in microgram per cubic meter. And then deposition could be, again, the same thing. Deposition could be dry deposition or wet deposition. And then we also output what's called instantaneous concentration, because at the end of the day, we output the concentration so that it is used as a starting point for the next day's model run. And then this is some information. I'll be talking about this later. So now we move on to CAMx technical formulation. Computational grids, this is at the vertical level, you have vertical heights following the terrain, which means imagine this is, say, some big mountain. Your first layer in the model is actually starting from at this point. So the first layer, vertical layer of the model follows the terrain. And usually we have a very fine first layer. It is like just 10 meters. So here you can see it goes up to about 10 kilometers total. And already flexi nesting is a special aspect of CAMx. We don't need to go into that there. And then how does it work? The model marches forward in time over a series of time steps. That is, like, let's say right now we are at 11 a.m., let's say, okay. So at 11 a.m., you see in your model a certain amount of emissions. Then you will do all the processes, which one? That is transport, advection, diffusion, chemistry, which could be gas or aerosol, dry deposition, wet deposition. You will do all of those in that time step. The time step is usually like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. In that time period, you will model all of this numerically. So this will result in a change in the grid concentrations for each grid cell. So suppose you're having some emissions in a certain place. After some time, it will go to the next grid cell and so on, or it will even go high or low. So slowly the model marches forward in time over a series of time steps. Okay. In terms of the chemistry, like I said, we have gas phase photochemistry. So ozone, NOx, VOC, CO, halogens like chlorine, fluorine. We also have methane. And then radicals. Radicals are these species, chemicals in the atmosphere that are very short-lived, but they're very, very, very important, like OH radical. Then we have many gas phase mechanisms. So a gas phase mechanism refers to the chemical formulation you're using in the model. So CB stands for chemical carbon bond. So your carbon bond, and you have different variations of that, and even SAPRAC. And then this preprocessor is what looks up photolysis rates. Remember, I talked about photolysis being where the sunlight breaks the ozone molecule, or it breaks NO2 into, or even other molecules into to different types of molecules. So to do that in the model, we use all of this information. Aerosol chemistry or particulate chemistry, I already talked about. You have all of these species: elemental carbon, organic carbon, sea salt, elemental metals, sulfate, nitrate, ammonium chloride, etc. And there are different treatments. When we say treatment, these are all like, really good, great scientists who have done put out different types of papers on different aerosol treatments. i.e. the different types of chemical characterization. And then how does the pollutants get removed? By dry deposition and wet deposition. Dry deposition, I mean, like, I don't know, Venke has done a presentation at the series. He probably did. So he did some work on this as well. So you use things like you calculate the deposition velocity, which in turn depends on many factors related to meteorology and land cover, to calculate how slowly or far quickly the different pollutants will drop to the Earth's surface. So what does dry deposition mean? It means removal of any pollutant to the surface of the Earth when there is no rain or snow. So it is completely dry condition. The molecules fall down slowly, or even the particles fall down slowly. Then you have wet deposition, which happens when you have rain or snow. And here we use certain scavenging coefficients. Here's an example where you see, like, this is a power plant. It's releasing SO2 and NOx. Because of the sunlight breaks apart the ozone, which then helps in oxidation. So the SO2 gets oxidized to sulfuric acid, NOx gets oxidized to nitric acid. Then that undergoes further chemistry in the clouds or droplets. And then finally that comes down in the rain as wet deposition. In the rain, it's all like dissolved. You can take a bucket of water next time it rains, and if you measure, you will see some ammonium, obviously some H+, nitrate, sulfate, etc. Right. So with regards to probing tools, first, source apportionment technology refers to the manner in which we apportion ozone and PM to emissions and boundary conditions. Okay, what this means is that you can track different source regions or different source categories, and you can assign emissions to them, and the model will keep track of all of those emissions. For example, you can say, I want emissions in Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka. You can do like that. Or you can say, I want emissions from thermal power plants, cement plants, transportation, from ships, from fires, etc. So each of those the model will track. So then you can see who is contributing how much to the air quality problem. So we track the precursor emissions and also secondary products like ozone, sulfate, etc. The biggest advantage, one of the big advantages of photochemical modeling is you can get secondary product. Secondary product means, when you have certain emissions to the atmosphere, like you're driving a car or you're going in a bus, the bus is released some NOx and SO2. So those are primary pollutants. But then in the atmosphere, when they convert to other pollutants, those are called secondary pollutants. So ozone is a good example of a secondary pollutant. Similarly, sulfate, nitrate, which can be formed in the air. So this source apportionment technology can account for all of that. So the two common source apportionment technologies I've shown on the left side. One is called APCA, the other is called PSAT. APCA refers to anthropogenic precursor culpability assessment. So here you can track source contributions to ozone. Which source is contributing to ozone, or which region is contributing. PSAT, the P is for particulate matter. So here it's all about particulates. So you can track source contributions to PM2.5, PM10, particulate sulfate, nitrate, ammonium, elemental carbon, organic carbon, and even crustal. So here I've given an example of the source groups we do when we do source apportionment. So for example, we'll set up 9 source groups for a given domain. The first one, when I say domain or modeling domain, it refers to the area over which you're modeling. So here we have 9 source groups. The first one is thermal power plants burning coal. Next is other stationary sources like cement plant or an industrial plant. Then another group can be on-road transportation. Then other mobile sources like even ships or other sources. Then biomass burning by humans, for example, that is a big source of pollution in Delhi, as we all know, the air quality issue. So that can be a source group. Then wildfires, then natural emissions are important. Like I mentioned before, natural emissions, you can come from, like say from vegetation releases like, I'll give an example. Like in Tamil, you say man vasane, right? So the soil itself releases certain chemicals, or plants. If you go near certain trees, you can smell certain things. So that's the biogenic emissions. And then you have lightning, which I said before, releases NOx. Boundary conditions is the contribution of sources outside the domain. This you can skip. So next we go on to probing tools or reactive tracers. This is a different type of probing tool where, let's say you have some chemical which you want to treat as a tracer. Tracer means, you don't want to do any chemistry with it, or you want to do very simple chemistry. Let's say you have some special toxic, you want to look at benzene, for example, or let's say toluene, okay, or xylene. In this case, it's 1,3-butadiene. Okay, so here you can use this reactive tracers where you can have simple chemistry, and the main thing about this is this species, their formation and destruction has minimal impact on the overall photochemistry. And then you can tag each tracer for source apportionment. So these tracers operate in parallel to the CAMx host model. So which means you can imagine first there's the CAMx main model, which you run to get things like ozone, PM2.5, PM10, sulfate, nitrate, NOx, SO2, all of those good things, right? Then separately, along the same time, this tracer model is being run. You are interested in, like, let's say some specific pollutant or air toxic, or you just want to disperse it in the air. You have no idea what chemistry it has, but you just know there's a lot of emission from a certain source, let's say from a port, or from a certain transportation sector, or from some burning. There's a lot of emissions being released. You don't know what its chemistry is. For now, you're going to assume it doesn't have any chemical transformation. You just release it in certain grid cells and then you tag it. So for that also, this reactive tracer is very useful. Okay. The last thing I wanted to talk about, last topic, is computer resources and Linux. So computer resources now, essentially almost everybody does photochemical modeling in Linux. Few people, a little bit testing gets done in Windows, but almost everything is in Linux. And usually we use Intel or AMD core chipsets. And like a place like IIT, you have some great computers, so you don't need to worry about all this. Even in other institutions, you have good computers or even supercomputers in some cases. The Fortran, it's Fortran 90 and now it's 95, which is used. There's some commercial compilers, but there are also a lot of free compilers. Portland Group, GNU Fortran. GNU or GNU is very famous in the computer world and the Linux world. A lot of free, useful things, even things like Python, etc., which is very hot these days. And then it uses some third-party libraries, including NetCDF, which I mentioned before. So, but anyway, all of this is freely available. So you don't have to pay for anything. The only thing you have to pay for is the computer. And if you're using a university computer, then, even that is free. Well, but somebody is paying for it, but at least free for you. And then the speed and memory depends on how many grids you have, what is the chemistry you're using, whether you're using a probing tool or not. Sometimes when we do really complex runs with a lot of source apportionment, it can be quite complex, but otherwise it can run very, very fast. And then you have to conduct tests to see what works best. I wanted to close out with a brief Linux primer for just in case you're interested in this topic, but you don't know anything about Linux. It's very easy to learn, and that's why I want to mention it. First of all, you'll get something called a terminal emulator. Assuming that is, I'm saying you have a PC right now, like a Windows PC or a Mac. So you'll first get a terminal emulator that provides access to Linux. The Linux computer itself, either you need to have, or you can download and install, or you can use your university computer, Linux computer. And then there is something called the command prompt. Even in Windows, if you do CMD, you'll get a command prompt. It's similar to that. And then you could use FTP, etc. So you have These terminal emulators are this first. I want to talk about here, and I'll come back to that slide. See, first, you are the user. You're using, let's say, you're using a Windows computer. You would install what's called a terminal emulator, which is something like PuTTY, PUTTY, or MOBA Xterm if you want like graphics visualization. Okay, so first you install that. This is free, and it's all of this. If you're looking at this for the first time, it may seem complicated, but trust me, it's actually very simple, all of this. So first you will install the terminal emulator, which is back to here. What does this do? It lets you issue certain commands. You'll connect to the Linux computer, and then you will run certain commands. How do you run the commands? You use what's called the shell. The shell is simply how you talk to the Linux computer. So there are different types of shells, BASH, CSH, and what it is, it doesn't matter. I would say if you're trying it out, just try any one and just go with it. Doesn't matter. Again, if you don't know Linux commands and shell scripts, it's very easy to learn. So then that in turn connects to the OS distribution of the Linux OS. These are different types. You also have Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian. These are different types of Linux kernel. And finally, that in turn talks to the hardware, which contacts the CPU, RAM, storage, and networking. So using this method, even if you just have a Windows computer, as long as either somebody you know has a Linux access, or you could actually download a Linux environment onto your PC, even that is possible. So you use that as your Linux base. And then using that, you can also use Linux for AirMod and even the Lagrangian or Gaussian models, but definitely for photochemical models. And given the advantages in or the improvements in AI these days, a lot of things are happening. So the world is changing. And by the way, what you may find very interesting, all of you, is that a lot of the people who are focused on air quality modeling these days in the world, because I see a lot of people in the US also, a lot of them are actually from Asia, specifically East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, India, other countries. Okay, the reason is, and I'm going to just pose one question. I'm curious if somebody wants to guess what the answer is. Why are most of the young air quality modelers that I'm seeing, why are a lot of them from places like China and India? And before I ask for an answer, so here's my email address. If you're looking for an environmental impact assessment job, so to be clear, this is not just air quality. So this is like supporting international groups. You'll be sitting in Chennai or sitting somewhere in India, working for Ramboll, supporting groups either in Ramboll, India, or supporting groups outside US. But the job itself is in India. It's not an international job. It is environmental impact assessment overall, like essentially looking for a good overall understanding, some smart people who understand environmental assessments in general. It can be water, like the combination of water, air, or if you're relatively new, but if you're very smart, that'll also work. So here's my email if you want to contact. So let me stop sharing and then go back to here. So
Krish,
yeah, let me hand it back to Dr. Shiva.
so thank you very much, Krish, for the nice talk and give the complete overview of photochemical model. I think I'm sure that you will have questions. I ask all the participants, if you have any questions, please type in the chat box. So before that, maybe we'll ask everybody to start your camera so that we'll have one picture. can plan to take a photo now. This time.
Professor Shiva, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir. 1 minute. Just we'll have one photo, and after first we'll start with your question.
Sir, my question to Professor Krish Vijayaraghavan is that so much. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for very nice presentation. It was presented in a very simple form, easy to understand. But my question is that so much research has been done all over the world, and it is possible to point out or identify the sources from pollution is coming. In spite of all this information, why this research is not being used to reduce or protect or improve the air quality across the world? Air quality keeps on deteriorating, and we are doing a lot of research, but this research is not being used for the community benefit. Where is the issue? Is the research not reliable, or the policymakers are not accepting this research or not using this research for the community benefit? Where is the issue?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you for that question. I think it's due to an inherent tussle between growth and development and the need for environmental protection, right? Because if you ask, you remember back in the day when we first had leaded petrol, and then we all moved to unleaded petrol, right? So at that time when the change was being made, there was some time when you had and no lead. And suppose you went to a petrol bunk and you found, let's say not us, but let's say the Aam Aadmi went there and he saw like two tanks, one with the leaded and unleaded, and the leaded was cheaper, right? Chances are he will pick that because it is an economic issue for him. So continuously it is a tussle between growth and production, and I think it really is up to the policy makers to think about the overall benefit of the country, right? Because a lot of, like you said, a lot of
Krish, we lost you. Just we'll wait for him. I think he was mentioning that
some internet problem.
Internet problem. Yeah, that's a very good question, Gupta ji. I think.
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I was just answering to Guptaji's question that it is up to the policymakers to use the research, the good research that's being done, and balance economic growth and environmental protection. So I will look to the policymakers to solve this problem. I think a lot of good research is being done in India and around the world.
For example, the problem of Delhi, every day and every year it is in news across the world. You also mentioned about Delhi's pollution. Yeah. And now you have got this photochemical sort of modeling. So is it possible to identify whether it is coming from that stubble burning from Punjab? If it is not, then why keep on blaming Punjab and Haryana for this?
Yeah.
There is some problem somewhere.
Yeah, no, it is definitely possible, and a few people are working on that. But it is a complicated issue because again, it is a policy matter, and I mean, it's like, I think it's a very complex issue, but certainly the research and the models are available. So if you or somebody else is interested in working on this, there's definitely some options available. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Gupta ji. So there was a question, Krish, you can read from the chat box, otherwise I'll read for you.
1 second.
Okay, so this is a question about there was a
Yes.
leaf area index as one of the inputs. Does the model consider chemical reaction between the pollutants and vegetation?
Right. That's a very good question, Ashwin. So leaf area index is used in the calculation of dry deposition because it is used in two ways, one for biogenic emissions and the interaction between pollutants and vegetation through deposition. So for example, if you have a large leaf area index, then there is more potential for deposition, that is the removal of pollutants to that leafy mass, right? And likewise in the context of biogenic emissions. So yes, the model does consider the interaction between not the chemistry, but the physical interaction between the pollutants and vegetation. No, separately, the chemical reaction can be considered separately and given as an input to the model. Okay, but in this case, what I was referring to was a physical interaction between the pollutants and the leaves or the vegetation. Okay, one more question. We need to run WRF Geoschem, this from Ankit Patel, WRF Geoschem to generate ICBC for CAMx, as you mentioned in one flow chart. Okay. So number 2, since there's particulate chloride in the model, can we use this to address? Yeah, particulate chloride, can we use this to address impact of chlorine chemistry on contrasting urban? Yes, good question. We actually have this chlorine chemistry in the model, halogen chemistry. This is a good point. So, for example, chlorine is common from sea salt environment. So we do have chlorine chemistry in the model. And then the third question, how comprehensive is it to learn this model from scratch, manuals or video tutorials? So yeah, you can go to that CAMx.com website that I gave, CAMx.com, CAMx.com, and there you'll have all the information. Okay, next question from Mr. Shaumik Mitra. In the Indian context for non-metro cities, towns, getting meteorological data are often very challenging. Is there any way to bypass this issue? Can we use meteorological data from the nearest available location? Yeah, so that's a good question. So when we run meteorological models, we can run it on a larger scale. Let's say, let's take some small town in India, for example, which you don't have meteorological data. That's okay. You can run this WRF, the WRF model, on a regional scale. That means, let's say there's a small town in Uttar Pradesh where you don't have data, but you'll run it for the entire northern India using as many observations as possible. And then the model does it a little bit through interpolation. So you still have options for doing it on a regional scale. You can, yeah, so you can take it from the nearest available location. It does not invalidate the results, but obviously the more data, the better, but it is not a must. You can still manage.
Krish, yeah, just to thank you. I think all interesting question. So this chemistry part, if you try to look at it, it's also influenced with different geographical location and environmental conditions. So is there any way where chemistry being, look at the kind of reactions that happens in US, maybe in Europe, and then comes to an Asia? So whether this model will able to take this large variations that happens?
Yeah, so it can do it in 2 ways. One, you can do it in a different region and get the concentrations as boundary conditions. So that's one way. So you do it in Europe and you have a certain chemistry there. You find out what the concentration is, let's say ozone, and then you get that as boundary conditions when you're modeling India. So that's one way. The other way is in the model itself, like photolysis, for example, is a function of actual geographic location. So how much sunlight you're getting in a specific place. So and of course the temperature and pressure is region specific. It is specific to India versus Europe, and then that affects also the chemical reaction rate. So those are some of the ways in which you can make it specific to the environment.
Okay. Krish, the other question I'd just like to know, this model being there since now if you have 7.3 version, it means that quite a couple of years it is being used. So whether it is being validated in different regions to bring a confidence on the user?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, it's validated extensively. In fact, EPA uses it whenever EPA does a new regulation. Like they say the ozone regulation used to be 75 ppb, then they reduced it to 70 ppb. When they did that, the model they use was CAMx. So the model is validated both by agencies like EPA, by universities in the US, and also by companies. So it is extensively validated, and it's now like almost 20 years old. So it's a very, very extensively validated model.
Okay, from the India, in the Asia, this model has been validated.
So on the Indian side, so I know that Sarath runs it quite a bit. Kodikonda, Chandra Venkatraman, I believe, runs it. I'm thinking of who are the main photochemical. You have about some photochemical modelers in the country, and they run. Some people prefer to use CMAC. Some people prefer to use WRF-Chem. The advantage of CAMx, of course, you have the source apportionment, so you can get the contributions of different species, the contribution of different source groups and regions easily. I think the reason WRF-Chem became popular in India is because of WRF, and then from there WRF-Chem. But in the US, it's mostly CAMx and CMAC are the two main. And then for the global boundary condition, we use GeoSchem usually. Yeah.
Okay. And so do we also support, maybe one of the reason for the WRF-Chem to be used is the WRF data is easily available, and probably that helps the students to do some utility of that work, that model for application. Whether similarly for the CMAC, do you have such databases available where they wanted to test and run this kind of a model?
Yeah, both CMAC and CAMx, there are tests available. Now, if you and there are some efforts by certain people in the India is also what I've heard. Just a few people that they are going to set up some databases, but certainly if anybody is interested in a project, I'd be happy to work with them, and we can set up something. And by the way, the WRF data is still used in these models, so that we can still use the WRF data. So yeah, right.
Yeah, maybe we will look for to have some model can be set up for at least Tamil Nadu region. Let's see with focus with Chennai first, and see that how it goes.
Yeah,
and probably will look forward to discuss with you on that context. Hopefully, are there any questions from anybody else? Otherwise, Krish is getting late for his sleep now. Yeah, if there are no questions, Krish, thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful talk, and you've a lot of insight with the modeling aspect, and you have given I'm sure that many more will start utilizing CAMx. So let's see. I mean, I am really excited to see that a student can start utilizing it for the next project. I'm just definitely would like to see. And maybe I'll also explore if there are any opportunities for the student exchange, and maybe I'll also suggest in our group to look for any opportunities to work with you. So thank you all for joining, and thank you very much, Krish, and so thank you for a wonderful talk, and thank you all participants for joining us, and we all look forward to all of you in the next air quality management lecture series, and also the Indian International Conference on Air Quality Management, which will go into held in December 18th to 20th. I'm sure that Krish also will make some effort to see that some opportunities for him to come to travel to India. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all. Bye.
Bye.